Okay, so I was doing some random blendering the other day and I came up with this and thought, hey, that looks cool. Let's make a tutorial. So here it is. Okay, so before we kick off on today's tutorial, I just want to give a big shout out to everyone who liked the last video that I uploaded, which was the how to make a siren or beacon using Blender 3.2. It seemed that everyone quite liked that one. Bit different from my usual videos because that's 20 minutes of me talking as opposed to a speed run, which is 10 minutes of seeing a mouse dart across the screen. So if you prefer those kind of videos, then let me know and I'll keep making them like that. If you've not subscribed before, then please do consider subscribing if you enjoy it. See, I said please, which means you've got to do it now, otherwise you're morally bankrupt. But anyway, let's crack on with today's tutorial, and thanks again, everyone. Okay, so just before we get into this, I've noticed that YouTube does some weird things with my videos sometimes. It compresses the quality a little bit, and it can make it a little hard to see some of the text. So if you are having trouble seeing the text, go to YouTube settings and set it to the highest quality you can, and that typically overcomes it. If you're still having trouble, just drop me a note in the comments, and I'll see about increasing the size of the text on this. Right then, so we've got Blender 3.2.2. We'll go straight to our scene. Let's get rid of the light. The first thing we want to do is we don't delete the default cube around here. No, we don't do that at all. Instead, we go to geometry nodes, select the cube, and we destroy it. There we go. Let's not delete it. Let's just destroy it. We go straight in for mesh primitives. We go for a cylinder. Plug that straight into there. Now then, the beauty about geometry nodes is that you even after creating your geometry, you can still modify the hell out of it. Now then, for this, we want a long cylinder, and we want lots and lots of side segments. So again, it's up to you, but something important to remember is that when you're rendering this, the more detail, the better it looks. But at the same time, the longer it takes your scene to render. I tried this on Eevee with lots and lots of these, and I was expecting about 1-2 seconds. Well, maybe a bit longer, 5 seconds for the scene to render, and it took nearly 30 seconds. So it pretty much killed it. So the more of these you have, yes, it looks better, but the harder it has to work. So let's set it to this and see what happens. Now, what we want to do is put some spheres on these points here, right in the middle. So we do instance on points, crank that into there, and we want to put some spheres in there. So you go straight into mesh primitives, isosphere, plug that into your instance, and straight away you look like it's gone completely insane. That's because the radius is pretty big. So we want to crank that right the way down, and let's have a look and just see in detail what we've got here. Yeah, we want to increase the vertices a little bit, bring it in. The best look is when it's dragged in. You also want to crank your subdivisions up to 2. Kind of give it that a bit more of a ball shape. In fact, let's drag the side segments down a little bit. No, we want to keep them. We want to decrease these. So there's a little bit of space. Again, it's entirely up to you. The more you have, the harder it is for your computer to run. You could move this up to 3, but again, it's more detail, and what we're dealing with is, I don't think you really benefit. We'll leave it on and just see how the computer gets on with it, but I think it's going to struggle. Now then, we want to vary the size of these spheres, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a noise texture, plant this down here, color into scale. The first thing you see is that the spheres become these really odd shapes. So we want to bring a color ramp in, plug it into there. First thing it does is it makes them all spherical again. Now, when you have it set to black, that makes it small. When you have it set to lighter colors, it makes it large. And what we want is somewhere kind of in between, like that. So if we do that, we can see a bit more of what we're doing. Let's drag that up. Drag that in, perhaps. So no, let's drag it there. Let's do that. Let's just see what that looks like. And we want to give this a bit of animation. So we turn the 4D on, gives us W factor. And that essentially gives us our time control. Now what we're going to do is go to a time. That one again, timeline. We go to 0. We're going to set this to 0 at the moment. Go to the last step. Now, the higher this number, the faster the animation will be. So, again, it's entirely up to you. I like to set mine to 5. We'll just see insert keyframe. So when you set that going, it looks a little bit like that. It's just pretty cool. You can actually use this opportunity to vary out the... It's only when it's moving can you really muck around with some of these settings. When it's static, it's pretty hard to tell what the final render is going to look like. I'm quite happy with that, but again, if you want to vary it, it's there. You can vary the radius. You can do all sorts to it, but I'm quite happy with that one. Now then, I learned this trick off Ducky 3D, and he in turn learnt it off another user, but it's a trick that is pretty effective. At the moment, this isn't really looping. It gets to W5, and then you can see it jump back to 0. So we want it to smoothly return to 0. The way to do that is to introduce a mix RGB shader. Time 0, we want that to be 0. And then what we want to do is duplicate with Shift-D, plug into the bottom. And we want this to work in the opposing fashion to the first noise one. So we know our maximum number is 5. Go to the very last frame, and we want to set that to 0. And we go insert keyframe. And now when we hit the go button, this should loop. Yes, it will loop, because that's set to 1. Doesn't really show you, does it? Oh, no, the reason why it doesn't is because I haven't set it to 1. Yep, we need to crank that to 1. Insert that keyframe. Let's drag it back so we're not wasting our time. Let's see. Yep, that looks pretty good. It's looped quite nicely, that. So that's your basic kind of, and let's give this a name. Let's call it a warp core. Why not? Let's call it a warp core. It looks pretty. It's going to look pretty warp core-ish when it's done, and we're going to call this a warp core 2. Warp core. Now then, I quite like using singular clusters of geometry nodes. So instead of creating more parts around this, what we're going to do is use this one geometry node for literally everything. It means when it comes to moving things around, when it comes to duplicating things, we're only duplicating one part. We're not duplicating so like 3 or 4 parts. And that's going to make life a lot easier going forward. So what we want to do is we're going to put like an inner cylinder in. Let's do that now. And to make this work, we need lots and lots of joins. So join geometry. And we want it to be very similar to this. So I'm going to give it a depth of 5, and I'm going to crank this into 0.85. Not too bothered about the inner details of this. In fact, actually, let's make it 0.9. We want it close, but not perfect. Okay. And then finally, we want some tops and bottoms. Now, this is quite a cool little trick. We go to cylinder again. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a transform. Let's do that and crank that into there. In fact, let's zoom in so you can see it. Transform, and at the moment let's not muck around with the numbers. Drag this down here so you can see it all on one screen. That's quite helpful, isn't it? Okay, so you can see another cylinder appearing there. We want this to be a little bit wider, so 1.25. Yeah, 1.25. I like to make it quite long as well because I want it to go off the bottom of the screen and just be gone. Not very descriptive, but it works. And then what we can do is use the translation, and we want this to be at the base, so -5. Okay, so you can see there are a whole host of things we can do. We can vary the scaling, we can do rotations, we can do all sorts of it. What we want to do first, though, is we want to do an extrude. And you can see that all faces have extruded. We only want the top. So selection extrude. Now, if I switch this button on, you'll see, let's turn that off. You can see that's the actual top of this cylinder. That's the top of the extrusion. So we don't want it quite as high as that. We'll bring it down. Bring this across. And then what we want to do is have a scale. And then bring the top into that selection. And then if we do that, there we go, 0.8. Actually, that looks pretty good as is. So at 0.8, that top, and it's kind of a very basic beveling approach. There are probably better ways of doing it, but and then let's crank that up, make it nice and smooth. So that is nearly complete. We can Shift D because we want another one for the top, and we plug that into the geometry. So same trick again. So essentially what this has done is it's created an identical. If we go there, you can now see it, but now it's upside down. So very quickly, 180. Let's turn that off. And that is your absolute basic. And let's put these to 0. Drag the X back. There we go. Want to 0 them again. I always struggle with this. There are better ways of doing it by tracking and such like, but what we're doing at the moment is there we go. Just getting this set up. Let's zoom that back, and then we hit the render button. Of course, there's not much to see there. Nothing's really been set. I've also knocked out the light. In fact, let's just get on with it. Right, so at the moment, there's not much going on in terms of textures. So let's start adding some. So set material. That one will be for these are overlapping a little bit, which isn't great. So that's for the spheres. This will be for the inner core. So let's set material. There we go. Same again, set material. Oh, wrong button. Get rid of that. Fat. Let's put that there, up to here. And let's be cheeky. Let's put a join in there. Join geometry. Plug that into here. That one there. Now, this is where I always struggle a bit. There we go. That's one. And that's two, not quite. Let's put that one up there. I need a better mouse. There we go. So essentially what we're doing is we're assigning materials to each one of these. The first one we're going to do is we're going to do the emission. And we go emission. Set that to emission. Want a nice color there like that. And let's just plug that straight into there, and I think it's about 10. So if I plug that on there, it's starting to get the glow. Let's put some bloom on. I'm going to render this in Eevee. Okay, next one is we're going to call this the inner core. Now this we're going to just make pretty dark. We're not over bothered. We just want to kind of blot out what's going on back here. So we're not going to put too much detail in there. And finally, we want our top and bottom. So let's call them outers. And let's do outers. Now, for outer, what I came up with was a nice kind of Tron-esque type laser lighting going on in there. It's a bit of detail, but it's animatable. So let's do that. Let's just show you how to do that one. So it's gone straight for outer, which is good. And what we want to do is let's just give me that's right. Oops. So mix RGB, mix shader even. Sorry, not mix RGB. Search, and we want to go for an emission again. It's entirely up to you. Sometimes it helps having a similar color to your core. So I'm just going to put this right about here. I'm going to give it 10. And now we want to tell the computer where to put these lines. So the way to do that is a Voronoi texture. and we will plant that into the color of there. And then you want your node wrangler on, and it's Control T, set it to object. Right, so let's see what this is actually producing. And then what we want to do is set this to Manhattan. So if we zoom in on there so you can actually see it, Manhattan. And then we want to scale this up to something like 25. And then we want to turn that to 0. And straight away you can see some lines. But it's quite densely populated. So let's use a color ramp. What we're going to do is blot out some of these. It's actually the other way. Drag that down. The more you drag down, the better it looks. I'll set that to 4D because we want this animatable. See what that looks like. That's looking pretty good. Now then, let's play around with these settings a little bit. Let's drag that down to there. Increase the roughness, decrease the roughness even, increase the metallic. Again, you can play around with this to your heart's content. In fact, is it better? It is better to do it this way. Let's do it this way. Add shader. Let's add shader. There we go. Let's add into there. Now, the difference between a mix shader and add shader. A mix shader transfers from one to the other, depending on what's going on up here. Whereas an add shader will kind of overlay them a little bit. And I find sometimes that that's a slightly better approach to this. So let's give it a little bit of detail. You're not going to be able to see much, but I like to add a little bit of detail just for practice, and yeah, because it looks cool. Let's put noise in here. So we're going to add a little bit of bump to it. Let's put some into the height, and then Control T. Shader into there like that. Let's let this catch up. Interesting. Ah, there we go. Okay, that's quite busy. So you can see there that it was taking a good chunk of time for it to do anything. Let's put a color ramp in because we don't want it to be too color ramp it. There we go. And you can do whatever you like with this one. You could have a Voronoi texture, have something a bit more angular. In fact, you know what? Let's do that. Let's put a Voronoi in. Voronoi is much better. I prefer Voronoi. Don't know about you all. Okay, let's see what that's doing. Okay, so that's a little bit cooler. You can really start playing around with some of the settings on here. And in fact, you can take this and go up to the roughness. It will start to take a little bit of time. Play around with some of these settings. You won't be able to see it very well, but it's sometimes nice just to have a bit of detail there. Okay, so we'll go to timeline, and what we're going to do is animate this effect. So we go back to our 0 position, and the same rule applies. The higher the number, the faster this is going to work. But we're not going to do the same thing that we did with the geometry node. We're not going to have our mix RGBs going on. We're going to just go straight for a direct run, because when this does go, you'll see that it just kind of bounces a little bit like that. In fact, that to me is a little bit too quick. So let's make it 2.5. Replace keyframe even. All right, let's do that. That's a little bit better. I want to crank up. No, actually, that looks pretty good. You can see there, because it's so random, you don't really need to worry too much about this one looping. It's not like a large body that's suddenly changing shape quickly. It's just a light that's changing quickly. And so in that case, you don't necessarily need to have the mix combination. So that's looking pretty good. Okay, so we're nearly done with our scene. We're going to set one of these up. We're going to set the ground up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add a bit of light and maybe try to duplicate these around. So let's go back to our geometry nodes. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to go to this space, Control A, and we want to add a plane. And what we're going to do is we're going to call these outers. Add a geometry node. So you could just about see the plane there, but we don't. Yes, we want to move it first. Let's just move it down. I could use. Could I do that? Yes. Yeah, you know what? Let's do it that way. Let's knock out the group nodes. Destroy. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a mesh primitive, and we're going to add a grid. We're going to plant that grid straight into here. And we need, what we're going to do is going to do 90 by 70, I found worked pretty well for me. And we're going to have 50 by 50. And if I turn this on, you'll see exactly what I've done there. Oh, I need to turn that one. It's turned it into a big grid. Now, the, here we go. Let's just play around with this a little bit. Now, the more detail you have, yeah, the better it looks. But at the same time, the harder your computer has to work. So we're going to create this grid. And then what we're going to do is we're going to separate the geometry. What we want to do is kind of give it a kind of bouncy texture. So we're going to separate geometry. Where are you? There you are. Could have just typed it all in. And then what we want to do is extrude. If we look to the side, you'll see exactly what that's done. It has indeed extruded the mesh, but it's done it all the same way. So again, we want to add a noise texture. If you were so well inclined, you could have your own animation so that it varied. So you could have a varying noise texture. Just remember, if you're going to do that, you're moving geometry. So if you want it looped, you are going to need to have some kind of combination or some kind of clever numbering going on in here that's going to create that. Now, vary the scale as much as you like. It doesn't really matter on this one. That is your base. So what we're going to do here is do a transform. And we want to bring this down. So actually -5 seems to be pretty good. Surprised it's -5, but okay. And whilst we're here, let's increase and increase. Actually, no, it's too much. You know what? I've gone too far. Let's bring that back. Okay, you can add a little math node in there if you like. Just give it a bit more. So multiply. What you can do there is you can really change the detail of this. And then what we want to do is we want to duplicate this. So Shift D, Shift D, not Control D, Shift D, down to geometry, and then we want a join geometry into there, and we want to go 5, and again we want to do a -180. So if we go back to our camera view, that's where we are at the moment. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so now the only thing left to do really is to add a set material, plug that into there, and we're going to give this a new one. We're going to call this outers, and let's go to the shading tab. I'll give this a little bit of detail. So we want to make that kind of a greyish colour. Is that actually working? Still a bit bland. Bump. Actually, did I even assign it? That's why we didn't see it, because we haven't assigned it. In fact, I've made a bit of a cardinal error there. I've given two things the same name. Outer scene, call it. Okay, that's a bit more like it. That's what I was expecting to see. Let's muck around with the roughness a little bit. And what I want to do is we just want to give this a little bit of detail. It's one of those things where you're probably not going to see it very well, but it will be there, and I think every little adds. Color ramp. To there, and into there. And we want to... Oops. So actually that's just a perfect example. I've actually gone a bit OTT on that one. You can see there the effect that has. So let's make that 50. Let's drop the strength down a little bit. Let's increase the metallic, I think. There we go. That's starting to look a bit more like it. So if we go to here, now if you hit the go button on render, that's pretty quick actually, but it's not looking very. It's it's there, but it's not looking very adventurous at this point in time, and that's because there's no light. It's on EV mode, so we want to put a light in, point light. And we want to increase its radius a bit. It's actually like within the core. So let's bring it out a bit more. And we want to make it 500. And it really helps to be the same color as this. So you could just copy and paste the hex code, and that will do it. And there we go. That's starting to look a little bit more like it. Let's bring this back a little bit further so you can see. Okay. It's not really having much of an effect changing the metallic. Okay, so let's render that one and just see. Whoops. Let's render that image and see what that looks like. And yeah, so it's starting to pick up in a bit of detail. I think a bit of tweaking here and there is going to give it a bit more magic. First thing we're going to do is we're going to drop that. There we go. Let's give that a go. Render image. There we go. That's looking pretty atmospheric at the moment. And now what we're going to do is we're going to kill our computer, because this process has a habit of doing that. So if we go back to our layout and let's hide that one. The beauty of having that all as one is that it just hit the ones and that's it. But now what we're going to do is we're going to add a few more of these. So control from above, we're going to do Shift-D and just start moving these around, and we want to rotate. And it's important to grab both the light and the core. And what we'll do is let's just do this a few times. Okay, and pull that back to there, and you can see straight away we've probably got a bit too much going on, but let's back the camera out a little bit. Let's do that. Render image. And there's what I was talking about. It's starting to get a bit busy up here. So that's gone to 3 seconds. And that doesn't look too bad at the moment. A really sharp-eyed person probably noticed that I haven't rotated some of these. And what that rotation does is, because there's so much going on, you can adjust these. So even slightly, and they look radically different. You could go into each one of these and create your own geometry node. But that's a bit overkill when you could have just simply gone... look from above and a little bit that way, 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 and a little bit that way. And there we go. Let's try that again. Render image. Notice there it's taking a little bit longer. The reason mine took so much longer is because I had loads of these, and I think the computer was pretty much ready to give up on me completely. So that is your basic kind of warp farm. And if we go and let's set this up. let's let's do it into core. I find if it's really big and it's going to take forever to render, I find keeping it at PNG is the better solution, because if your computer bails out or you need to use a computer for something else, it's doing each shot, and then you can just drop each shot into the video editor. But if it's only 3 seconds, like this one is, and I think the reason why it's 3 seconds, not 30 seconds, is because we've got so few of these going on compared to my test model, then you can actually just go to fmeg, encoding, set it to MP4. Always set it to MP4 because my Outstation account, it won't accept the other, is it MKV file? MPEG-4 just seems to do it pretty well. You want to do to perceptually lossless. I'll have a decent animation out of this. Just having a look at the file. So we've got 250 at 4 seconds. That's 1,000 seconds. So it's not going to take mega long to do. And yeah, let's hit the go button and see what happens in a bit. Okay, so this is how the rendered video looks. At the moment, it's very static. We've not added anything to the camera to make it bounce around a bit. My first thoughts on this, maybe need to dial down that kind of Tron-esque laser-like effect. That's otherwise it's not looking too bad. What it seems to be bouncing a bit. The actual warp core bubble effect looks to be bouncing, but otherwise it's not looking too bad. So add a few more tweaks, and this is where we... Okay, so this is the final render, and I've added a few extra bits and pieces to it. We've actually got a volume around this, which has a principal volume attached to it. So it's just a cube with principal volume, and it kind of gives it a bit of that kind of smoky, misty look to it. We've also added, as you can see, a bit of a rotation to the camera as well to kind of give it a bit more, just a little extra effect. So that's pretty much it. Quite straightforward, nothing too difficult. But as I say, the more detail you put in, the harder your computer has to work. I mean, this particular render took about an hour and a half to do 10 seconds worth. So there's quite a lot going on in there. But yeah, play around with the settings. If you have any problems, drop me a comment below. And yeah, if you're not subscribed, please do if you've enjoyed this. And I'll be back next time with some more cool things to show you, hopefully. So until next time, everyone take care. Right, cheers, bye-bye.